Somewhere in New York, a wire transfer request sits in a queue. $35 million, routed to a shell company in the Philippines. Approved, processed, gone. Then another, $25 million, same story. Then another and another. In the span of a few hours, nearly $1 billion begins moving through the global banking system, quietly, methodically, without a single gun, without a single alarm. The people who orchestrated this are not in a room together. They are not wearing masks. They may not even be in the same country. And the institution they are robbing, the Central Bank of Bangladesh, has no idea yet that anything is wrong. This is not a story about brute force. This is a story about how a group of attackers learned to think like a bank. Because the most unsettling part of this heist is not how close they came to $1 billion, it is what stopped them. The Bangladesh Bank sits in Dhaka. It holds the country's foreign currency reserves, the economic anchor of a developing nation. In 2016, those reserves were kept, as is standard practice, at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That arrangement is not unusual. Central banks around the world park their reserves at the New York Fed. It is considered among the most safe institutional relationships in global finance. The trust involved is architectural, centuries of precedent, layers of protocol. What was at stake on the surface was money, nearly $1 billion if everything had worked. But beneath that number was something more consequential: the integrity of SWIFT, the messaging network that connects over 11,000 financial institutions across 200 countries. Every international wire transfer you have ever heard of passed through this system. It is the invisible skeleton of global commerce. The attackers did not try to break SWIFT, they decided to use it, which meant the plan would only work if it was, from the outside, completely invisible. And for a while, it was. To understand the genius of this operation, you have to understand what the attackers actually saw when they looked at international banking. Most people see a wall, secure institutions, encrypted channels, international regulators. These attackers saw a relay race. Here is how a legitimate international transfer works. A bank sends a message through the SWIFT network to another institution, in this case the New York Fed, instructing it to move funds to a specified account. The New York Fed processes that instruction. The funds move. The key insight the attackers had was that the instruction itself was the vulnerability, not the encryption, not the physical infrastructure, the trust. They spent nearly a year inside Bangladesh Bank's systems before making their move. They mapped how the bank used SWIFT. They studied the message formats. They understood the timing, when the New York Fed was open, when Bangladesh Bank was closed for the weekend, when the gap between those two calendars would create the longest possible window before anyone noticed. They planted malware that could read and delete SWIFT messages from Bangladesh Bank's terminals. This allowed them to transmit transfer requests that looked identical to legitimate ones, and then erase the evidence from the sending side before bank employees arrived on Monday morning. The requests went out on a Thursday night in Bangladesh. Friday is a holiday there. The New York Fed processed the requests Friday and Saturday U.S. time. By the time Bangladesh Bank opened again on Sunday, the money was already in motion across 4 countries. What they constructed was not simply a hack, it was a calendar exploit dressed as a banking instruction. They did not steal the keys, they learned to write the letters, and it worked, until one word broke everything. Out of 35 transfer requests totaling nearly $1 billion, the New York Fed processed 5 before something stalled the rest. One of the destination accounts raised a flag with Deutsche Bank, which was acting as a routing correspondent. The account name was associated with a foundation,
but the spelling of the word foundation in the transfer instruction contained a typographical error. Not a technical anomaly, not a cryptographic mismatch, a spelling error. Deutsche Bank flagged the transaction and sent a query back to Bangladesh Bank for clarification. This was a routine compliance check, the kind that happens every day across the system. But in this instance, it broke the silence. Bangladesh Bank, now alerted, began reviewing the other requests and discovered the scale of what had happened. Of the 35 transfers, 30 were stopped or reversed. Approximately $81 million had already reached accounts in the Philippines and was largely moved into the country's casino system, an environment with minimal financial tracing requirements at the time, and was gone. The attackers had anticipated nearly everything. They had studied the systems, they had accounted for the time zones, the holidays, the format of the messages. They had built, over 12 months, a mechanism of extraordinary operational precision. And then, a single misspelled word in one destination account, a word they didn't write, in a name they didn't choose, activated a routine check that human compliance officers were trained to perform. The plan did not fail because of a firewall. It failed because of a proofreader.
Here is what this story actually reveals. When we build complex systems, financial networks, security infrastructures, large organizations, we tend to evaluate them at the level of their most sophisticated components. We stress test the encryption. We audit the protocols. We worry about the architecture. What we consistently underestimate is the weight carried by the smallest, most human details. The attackers understood this asymmetry better than the defenders did. They did not try to break a cryptographic algorithm. They exploited the assumption that a message sent through the right channel, in the right format, at the right time, would be treated as legitimate. They bet on the system's confidence in its own procedures. And they were right until they weren't. The irony is precise. The same human layer that failed the defense, the assumption that the channel validates the content, was the same human layer that failed the offense. A word misspelled by someone else in an account name that existed before the attack began. The attackers controlled every variable they could see. The variable that undid them was one they could not see, because it was embedded in a decision made by someone else years earlier, for reasons that had nothing to do with a heist. In decision-making under complexity, control is always partial. You can master the system. You cannot master every artifact the system contains. The gap between those two things is where most plans actually fail. The Bangladesh bank heist raised a question that the financial world has never fully answered. If the transfer requests were technically valid, correct format, correct channel, correct authorization structure, and the only thing that flagged them was a spelling error in a destination account name that the attackers did not write, then the system worked exactly as designed. Which means the question is not whether the attackers broke the rules. The question is, what happens when the rules themselves are the vulnerability? And if a system's legitimacy can be replicated with enough patience and study, what exactly is legitimacy protecting?